Hello and welcome to Hot Topic. I'm Hugh Richards. This week I'm with Alan Hardwick, Police and Crime Commissioner for Lincolnshire, elected in 2012 as the office was created and as an independent. Alan Hardwick, welcome to Hot Topic.
It's my pleasure, Hugh.
Very recently, your Chief Constable, Neil Rhodes, has been making statements about the absence of funding for police forces generally and the consequences specifically for the Lincolnshire force, that you're likely to be losing about 236 officers, and this is on top of previous losses over previous years, that you'll have much slower 999 responses, that you'll have fewer bobbies on the beat, and that fewer actual crimes will be able to be investigated.
It's a very powerful statement, isn't it, particularly coming from a Chief Constable. The Chief Constable is, of course, my principal policing advisor. When he's worried, I am worried. This is a situation which actually can be averted by the government taking action very, very quickly to even out the funding, which penalises Lincolnshire and actually benefits some other forces that are cash rich still. I mean, I look at it this way. Okay, nobody would argue with the ring fencing of the funding for the health service, for education, but doesn't law and order underpin all that? In fact, the whole of society. And why should the government play, as I see it, fast and loose with funding?
Can I just get, before we go into a couple of those issues that you raised, go into some of the specifics here. By how much must the Lincolnshire Forces budget be cut?
Well, I wish we knew. I mean, it's going to be many millions of pounds, but we don't get the actual settlement until later on. What we're doing is we are looking at the scenario that we had to face in the last funding year, where we're taking that forward, where we're saying for the models that we produce, well, it's going to be, it's going to be this, it's going to be a bit worse. So therefore, this is what we assume is going to happen. But it's an assumption that that's based on best information available to some of the best financial professionals in the business.
And this will be a cut from the money provided by central government.
Yes.
What proportion of the force's income is money provided by central government as opposed to the police precept on council tax?
Our council taxpayers in Lincolnshire pay well above the national average for their policing, which I don't think is right. So that's, to answer your question, they pay more than 30%. I think the government...
More than 30% of the force's income? Of
the force's income, yes. So they should not have to pay that amount of money. So the police force itself has been singled out recently by Her Majesty's Inspectorate as being exceptional in the way that it provides value for money policing. The people in Lincolnshire pay more than I think they should pay as a percentage of their council tax for policing. And yet we are, by the same inspectorate, HMIC, branded as one of the forces which is in danger of simply, I suppose, not being able to continue in business.
When you say that the force has been judged to be exceptional, that's exceptionally good, of course.
Yes, indeed.
That suggests that perhaps it could afford to take some cuts and still remain adequate.
No, in fact, that's not true. Would that it were. It's exceptional in the way that it polices and provides value for money policing. In other words, we do more and more for less and less. Now, the extrapolation of that is surely the government can't expect us in the future to do everything with nothing.
And you would resist any moves to raise the police precept in the council tax paid by the people of Lincolnshire?
I don't think there is any commissioner in this, or very few commissioners in the country who will not now be looking at raising their precept. I know, for instance, that my colleague down in Surrey, which is the richest county in England, is already looking at raising his precept by 25%. Because he fears for the future as well.
We'll talk about the political impact of that a little later, and you're the holder of an elected office. But just to go back to one or two things you've already said, you suggested that other forces could afford to take these cuts.
Yes, indeed.
Could you be more specific? Are you talking about the Met, the Metropolitan Police Force?
The Met
Manchester?
The Met is never taken into any considerations of this sort, because they are totally different from any other form of policing, and their budget is in the billions of pounds. So not the Met, but certainly some of the more urbanised areas, shall we say, should be able to manage on less, so that the disparity between them up here, cash rich, and us and forces like us down here, which should be like that.
Which are the cash-rich rural forces then?
There aren't any cash-rich rural forces. That's the whole point. You see, North Yorkshire, Lincolnshire, Wiltshire. They're just three of the forces that have been told by HMIC that they've run out of wriggle room, basically. That the cuts have affected their the chances of them remaining in business in the long term. And we're talking about the long term.
Remaining in business? You mean police forces could be closing down?
I think that what will happen is that amalgamation will rear its head again. And that,
well, if that creates efficiencies of scale, then perhaps that's the solution.
Which is it's a solution. It's a solution. But what will happen with amalgamation is more of the same, in that all the resources would be concentrated on urban areas, and the rural areas would again be the poor relations. I don't think it would actually solve the problems in rural areas.
You would like to have more money. You don't want to raise the police money on the council tax.
I prefer not to.
You'd like to have more government,
yes.
Central government income. You say that the prime purpose of the state is to protect citizens from each other. That's a sort of, it goes back to Thomas Hobbes.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
prime political
To
definition
preserve law. To preserve law.
of what the
right.
state does.
Yes.
We're living in times of austerity. There's a terrible central government deficit. Where would you have the money taken from to contribute to the police forces?
What I would say is just, you don't need to take the money from health, education, overseas aid, or anything like that. What I'm saying is that the total police budget, which is administered via what's called the funding formula, which is a piece of gobbledygook, then that entire budget, keep that budget as it is, redistribute it more fairly, so that people like the residents of Lincolnshire get a fair deal, which they don't at the moment.
In this, you are standing shoulder to shoulder with your Chief Constable, Neil Rhodes. Your relationship hasn't always been that friendly. Soon after you were elected in 2013, you had him suspended. He was reappointed as acting Chief Constable then by action of the High Court. Why did you have him suspended?
Oh, I'm really not. I'm really not willing to go into what is ancient history. The point is that the Chief Constable and myself now form a very effective partnership in Lincolnshire. We are shoulder to shoulder. His interests and my interests are the same, which is the well-being, the safety and security of the people of Lincolnshire. And we've shown, I think, by what's happened very recently, that we're not afraid to put our heads above the parapet. He as my most senior officer, and me as the commissioner. So we will fight together on this one. And can I just say that putting your head above the parapet requires a little bit of courage. It certainly requires the courage of your convictions, and it requires the ability to, shrug off the slings and arrows of
outrageous fortunes.
Of critics.
I'm a classicist. I'm interested in ancient history, and the taxpayer, for the whole of that suspension and reappointment, the litigation, the taxpayer spent about £160,000 on that process. So, just once again, for one more time of asking, why did you suspend him?
I'm not willing to go down that route. I mean, it really is ancient history, and also the figure of £160,000 is wrong.
Okay, we'll move on. We're going to touch on the political aspect as we did before of being commissioner. One of the reasons that you're reluctant, of course, to raise the police precept is that nobody in government in a position of raising tax at all who's elected wants to make himself that unpopular. It's a political position. You stood as an independent, so you're not aligned to any particular party. But there are parties, and specifically the Labour Party, that wants to do away with the office of police commissioner. Would you resist attempts to abolish the office that you hold?
I had a very pleasant conversation with Jack Dromey, the shadow policing minister, not long ago. There were just the two of us in the room at the time, and he was eager to know what I thought about it, and I will tell you what I told him, which is that I am not precious about the job. If whoever, if Labour form the next government, and if they can come up with something which is as open and transparent as the present system, then fine. I certainly wouldn't stand in the way of that, and I'm most certainly, as I say, I'm not precious about the job. I'm open-minded enough to see that if something better comes along, fine. Then let's go for that.
Do you think that the I suppose the noun is the commissariat is a better way of holding police to account than the old police authorities were?
It most certainly is. It's certainly far more open, and it's certainly far more accountable itself. The role is accountable itself. I am there. I am, as it were, the figurehead. The brickbats and occasionally bouquets come my way. They're aimed at Alan Hardwicke.
Alan, we'll come back and talk about the political role again, especially the possibly the politicisation of the police and the merits and dangers that might approach that, amongst many other things, after the break. But for now, thank you very much, and we'll come back in a few minutes. Please join me after this break. Welcome back to Hot Topic. I'm talking to Alan Hardwicke, Police and Crime Commissioner for Lincolnshire. Alan, before we were interrupted, we were talking about the political merits of having an elected Police and Crime Commissioner, the possibility that the job might not last very long depending on the results of the next general election. That's a democratic element that might be welcome at the top end of the police force, that the commissioners are elected. But it also introduces an element of politics to policing. And of course the police are necessarily politically objective and neutral. Has it been a good thing to bring politics into policing?
Well, the people of Lincolnshire certainly didn't think it was a good idea to mix politics and policing, which is why they elected an independent. And I think, the direct answer to your question is no. Politics and policing do not mix as far as I'm concerned. You cannot, and I've met commissioners, obviously, of different political persuasions, and they're fine people, and they do go their own way. They are their own men and women. But I suppose there's always the danger of public perception that it's a stitch up by whoever, the Labour Party, the Tory Party. And I think public perception is extremely important.
Well, there are other police areas, not Lincolnshire, but other police forces where the Commissioner was elected specifically on a party stand. And of course, again, in the great tradition of British policing, we don't have anything like a Minister of Police. A Minister of Police has a horrible Soviet smack to it, doesn't it? But there will be the suspicion that commissioners who are standing for a political party might police in a way that favours the policies of that party, not necessarily the electoral hopes of that party, but if one party wants to make this criminal in its manifesto and another party doesn't, then whatever the government, whatever the democratic decision of the House of Commons in making law, a commissioner can decide which laws are going to be enforced that happen to be most closely resemble the ideology of his party.
That is always, I suppose, human nature being what it is, that is always a danger. I can say hand on heart that I have seen and experienced nothing like that since my election. And commissioners do meet on a fairly regular basis. We all get together sometime during the year, and of course there's regional collaboration as far as Lincolnshire and the other forces in the East Midlands are concerned. There's Lincolnshire, there's Derbyshire, there's Nottinghamshire, there's Leicestershire, and there's NorthAnts. So you've got an independent there. You've got a couple of Labour politicians, and you've got a couple of Conservative politicians, and we get on extremely well. And I can say, whenever we get together, our prime concern is not politics. That's never enters into it. It's what can we do for the people that we serve, the people of our counties, the people of the East Midlands. And the collaboration works extremely well.
There is another aspect of having elected police commissioners as well, and the fact that the success of an independent perhaps demonstrates it, which is it is clear that people no longer like the political party system, and that the only elected politicians that we have in this country who are not necessarily associated with a political party are a number of the police commissioners. Do you think that there's a possibility that there's a political career ahead of you, rather like the Consulate of Rome, that as an independent individual who has a democratic mandate, that gives you perhaps a grounding point to, well, at least that you create a model for a future politics?
That's a hugely interesting question, and I haven't actually thought about it because I'm I'm not an overtly political creature. But there are 12. Yes, there are 12 independents. So nearly a third of the country has, I think it's nearly a third. My maths is no.
Let's go with a third.
Let's go with a third. A significant proportion of commissioners are independents. So maybe I don't know. Maybe there is a chance to do what you said, but it's certainly not. I don't have any political ambitions of any sort.
With the next election, so to be Commissioner of Lincolnshire, will you be standing again? Would you want to keep the job?
It all depends. It really does all depend on what happens with the general election. I mean, if Labour get in, then obviously it'd be pointless to hanker after a job that no longer exists, and who knows what's going to happen with, I don't know, UKIP or Conservatives or any other party or a coalition. So I've got a very open mind about it. But I find the job, it's hard work, but it's extremely rewarding. So I would hope to continue for as long as I can.
Can I just ask a little bit about the nitty-gritty of policing a place like Lincolnshire?
Sure.
Firstly, with a question about policing everywhere. We're very aware of all the CCT cameras that we have in this country. We're a very well-observed nation. And we're very well aware of the fact that so much crime involves communication, and that involves technology. Yeah. So a great deal of crime is solved, or at least investigated, by looking at computers, by looking at mobile phones. And yet, in the investigation of that crime, that equipment is taken away from people to be investigated as evidence. And those people are not guilty until proved guilty by a jury of our peers. That equipment can be taken away from people for months on end sometimes. And that is a deprivation of property and a deprivation of the liberty to use that property, and thus a punishment applied to people who have not been convicted of a crime.
Wow. I would say that if someone is charged with a crime, then it's this is operational policing. You would have to ask a police expert. Well, I'm not an expert in operational policing.
Well, it's the principle of depriving people of property and their liberty to use it.
I would say that the taking away a mobile phone or a laptop or whatever is perfectly permissible if that person has been charged with an offence, and yes, for however long it takes. I mean, I regret that it does take quite a long time because of the complexity of modern communications to actually interrogate mobile phones and computers and this sort of thing. And I'm sure that procedure could be streamlined. But if the police deem it necessary as part of their investigations, then I think that's permissible.
And if that person who's been deprived of his or her property should later be found guilty and leave the court without a stain on their character,
found not guilty,
found not guilty and
surely.
leave the court without a stain on their character, then what compensation will the police provide for having deprived that person of that property and liberty for such a long time who has not committed a crime?
Well, the property will be returned. I mean,
yes, but the time without that property can't be returned.
The court will decide whether or not that person is guilty or not guilty. The police will simply present a case in the best possible way, and if that involves using as evidence whatever is on a mobile phone or a laptop, then so be it. I think that's how it should work, and I'm comfortable with that.
One of the aspects of a very agricultural police area like Lincolnshire, as we're becoming belatedly aware, perhaps, is that some agricultural workers are working against their own will, perhaps in captivity, not being paid for it, having had their passports taken away and being told lies and deceived into it, effectively slavery. How effective is the Lincolnshire Police Force in fighting this remarkable modern phenomenon of slavery?
We are effective, and this comes from not only our collaborative working with the East Midlands forces, other forces obviously have this problem. Forces that you might think, well, that's an urban area. It happens everywhere, but I take your point that it might happen more often.
In agriculture is very much a field
area
in which it occurs.
Yeah, so we adopt a very robust attitude towards it. It is successful. It's one of those crimes where borders do not matter to criminals. They do not matter to the police either. There is a lot of cross-border work, and it is successful. Can I just say I gave evidence to the cross-party committee before they decided to go down the line that they have done with slavery, and I think that's absolutely right. Modern slavery, what is being done by the government is absolutely right.
Well, that's the Modern Slavery Act, which will be coming into force
Yes.
early next year. And yet, surely, we don't need a new slavery law. Surely slavery has been against the law
No.
since William Wilberforce, a
We
hero here.
we have a if you go into the distant past, of course, our record with slavery is appalling. But then again, William Wilberforce, and so we we have an opportunity now to lead the world once more in the work that Wilberforce started. What a tragedy that in the 21st century you and I can be sitting here and talking about it.
One further, just on the aspect of the rural nature of Lincolnshire, there are very specific rural crimes like poaching, which is not a sort of charming pub sign, it's very dangerous men and women, dog fighting, illegal hunting, things like that. How many specifically dedicated rural officers do you have, in a Land Rover going up and down the wolds to look after these crimes? What sort of investment do you make in that?
What I can tell you is that all our officers are dedicated, whatever area they work in, and that you have
dedicated to
mentioned
that job. I'm sure they're all dedicated professionals, but I mean who have only that work to do and are not distracted by other work.
Right.
Who are specifically rural officers.
There are, well, again, I'm not avoiding the question. We do not have a huge rural team, as it were, that we can call on, that is dedicated to that. Would that we had the money to do that. And I'm not the only commissioner of a rural county who would tell you.
But I've seen officers in Land Rovers rather than in cruisers.
We do have Land Rovers, and we do have, we have vehicles, and we have officers with the skills to devote themselves to that particular work that you're talking about. In fact, our principal officer recently won a national award for his works. I'm very, very proud of them. They work very hard. I should add here that our officers have one of the highest workloads in the country, but that takes us all back to the funding again.
Of course.
And we've sort of left that behind for a while. But
can I just the size of the area? But so very quickly, please. Yeah.
Very, very quickly. One of the crimes you haven't mentioned is hair coursing.
Right.
Now, we have an operation called Operation Galileo, which is enormously successful.
Alan, congratulations on Operation Galileo, but we must stop there, forgive me. Alan Hardwick, thank you very much. My thanks to the Police and Crime Commissioner of Lincolnshire. That's it for this hot topic. I hope you'll join me again next week, but for now, goodbye.